Would anyone choose an expensive gift just to annoy someone? My landlord is exactly that kind of person. It's not blatant revenge, but let's lightly retaliate. The coffee I received was delicious, and it's my nature to turn harassment into a breeze with my cheerful daughter-in-law. My name is Karen. I'm a 55-year-old housewife. I want to live happily every day. That's my goal, but sometimes trouble comes my way and it involves me without warning. Mom, she's here again. I peeked into the garden from the kitchen window as Naomi, my daughter-in-law, said that past 7 a.m. Yes, she's here again today. We discovered the old lady secretly trying to steal vegetables from the vegetable garden Naomi and I care for daily. Well, she's already climbed over the fence, so maybe it's better to say boldly. It's been happening almost every day, hasn't it? She must be taking it for breakfast if she comes at this hour. Oh, tomatoes and eggplants ready to be eaten. I wonder if she makes salad or maybe pickles. Maybe the eggplant is for salad. I can't help but laugh at Naomi's reaction as she wonders about the old lady's menu while being angry. Mom, why are you laughing? This isn't funny. It's been a year since Naomi, my bright and cheerful daughter-in-law, moved in after marrying my son. I really liked Naomi. She's cheerful and somewhat innocent. Let's complain to her today. Even if she is the landlord, taking the vegetables we worked hard to grow is stealing. Yes, the vegetable thief is our landlord. Just because she owns the property doesn't mean she has the right to our vegetables, but I can't say I'm completely blameless. The story started when I began a vegetable garden 10 years ago and gave her some vegetables as a gesture. We couldn't consume all the vegetables within the family, so I occasionally gave some to the landlord. Eventually, she started taking vegetables from our garden without saying a word. I explained the situation to Naomi. She told me, "You don't need to deliver them anymore, I'll just take them myself." What does that mean? It seems she thinks she's doing us a favor by saving us the trouble. I was really looking forward to those ripe tomatoes and they just disappeared. I was so shocked. Despite claiming to save us the trouble, she always takes the best items. They say the resentment over food is scary, and Naomi seems quite angry. We live in a 40-year-old house in the suburbs of Nebraska. The rent is cheap, and the house has a rather large garden, so we like it. The town is also close by car, and there's plenty of nature. There's just one problem. Our landlord is eccentric. My husband and I met and married in LA. Both of us worked for a supermarket chain. When my husband was 35, he was assigned to a ranch in Nebraska and appointed as the manager. That's when we moved here with our son. We've been living in this house for 20 years. My family consists of my husband, who is the same age as me at 55, my 30-year-old son, and my 29-year-old daughter-in-law, Naomi. My son works at the city hall, and Naomi also works there in a different department. When my son and Naomi got married, they wanted to continue working, so they requested to live with us. Contrary to the typical mother-in-law and daughter-in-law issues, Naomi and I got along well from the start. What brought us together was our shared love for a band that has been around since I was young. It's wonderful that they've been active for so long. We talk about our favorite albums, songs, and live concerts we've attended. We've even planned to go to a concert together. It seems that having a shared favorite band can bridge the generation gap. When my son and Naomi decided to live together after their marriage, we went to greet the landlord. Ah, that quiet little boy. I thought he'd never get married because he wasn't very impressive, but I'm glad a reasonably pretty bride came. As usual, she says things like not very impressive and reasonably pretty, which I think are proper insults, but she seems to mean them as compliments. I stopped Naomi, who was about to say something, with a hand gesture. So we're looking forward to living here. Thank you. With that, we shook hands and quickly left. What's with that person? She said Mike is not very impressive and that I'm only reasonably pretty. That's not a compliment, is it? Naomi was understandably upset. She doesn't mean any harm. I know it's surprising, but that's just how she is. Of course, Naomi couldn't accept it. I remembered when we first moved in, we brought some sweets as a gift when we greeted the landlord. What's this? Sweets? I live alone, so I can't finish all this, and it'll go bad. Think a bit more and bring something that doesn't spoil, she said and handed the sweets back to us. And did you greet the neighbors? We told her we had greeted the neighbors across the street and next door.
That's not enough. You have to greet every house in the neighborhood association's group. Bring something with you.
She handed us a map and a list of houses in the group. I thought to myself that we had moved to quite a challenging place. Still, when we visited each house to greet them, all the neighbors were very nice and I felt relieved. We later went back to the landlord with a set of soap for her. I came to understand that the landlord was an extremely straightforward person, to say the least. One morning, Naomi finally exploded.
Could you please stop taking our vegetables without permission? What? This is my land, isn't it? I'm just taking vegetables growing on my own land. Yes, it's your land, but we're renting it, so it's ours now. Taking vegetables grown by me and Mom is theft. Theft? Don't say such nasty things. If I were to cut the weeds in this garden, would you complain that I'm stealing them?
You've never cut the weeds for us, have you?
That's just a hypothetical situation. You can't even educate your daughter-in-law properly, can you, Karen?
When I rushed over, the landlord had already given up on the vegetables and was heading back to her house.
I did it, but I protected the vegetables. Let's make some stuffed peppers with these green peppers.
Naomi said that with a fist pump, so I replied, sure, and let's make breakfast. We harvested the vegetables together and went back to the house. Later that day, after everyone except me left for work, I was doing the dishes and laundry when the doorbell rang. It was our neighbor, Mrs. Taylor, bringing over a community newsletter. Mrs. Taylor, who's 10 years older than me at 65, has lived here for over 40 years and has been a good neighbor for the past 20 years.
This morning, Naomi gave her quite a talking to, didn't she?
She handed over the newsletter, adding,
It's good medicine for her. She's not well liked in the community. She's lived here longer than I have, but I always wondered how you managed to put up with her.
Knowing that the conversation was going to be long, I invited her in for tea.
Sure, I'll bring over some sweets I received the other day.
She dashed back home and returned with a box of baked sweets. According to Mrs. Taylor, their landlord's son and his wife used to live in the house where we are now.
They built a house on the land they owned for their daughter-in-law who didn't want to live with them, but they moved out in less than 2 years. If she came to harass them daily, it's no different from living together. It's no wonder they couldn't stand it.
The son and his wife moved out right after their child was born.
It was obvious she could interfere with the child rearing, and the daughter-in-law couldn't bear it.
Even though she finally had a grandchild, she ruined it herself.
After the house became vacant, she started renting it out. But until you moved in, everyone left within a year.
That explains why the rent was below market value. When we were house hunting, the real estate agent told us the house is cheap because there's a bit of a nosy old lady next door who's the landlord. In hindsight, we got a good deal thanks to those who left. I had grown up with a grandmother who was meddlesome and nagging, so I didn't mind too much. I thought it was fine if we could live in such a cheap house. It turned out the landlord was 10 times more meddlesome than my grandmother, but since we were living together, I didn't take it too seriously.
Her late husband had been living here for a long time and owned 2 small apartment buildings, but even with money, living alone at that age must be lonely.
It seemed Mrs. Taylor had wanted to talk about the landlord for a long time. She said she couldn't bring it up because it would sound like gossip. Having said everything she wanted to, Mrs. Taylor left with a satisfied expression.
I'm on your side.
She left us with those strong words. When I told Naomi the story after she came home from work, she said,
I see. If I had a mother-in-law like that, I wouldn't last a year. I'm glad I have you, Mom. By the way, I've always thought this, but Mom, you're quite natural, aren't you? Maybe that's why you could live here for 20 years without worrying too much.
Oh, I thought someone like you was more natural, Naomi.
No, I just say what comes to mind.
Anyway, my daughter-in-law and I seemed to be natural companions. The next day after the family left for work, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was the landlord.
I'm sorry about the other day. Here's some coffee for you. I know you and your daughter-in-law have bread for breakfast, right? Enjoy it together.
She handed me a box wrapped in fancy paper. Oh, there's no need to go out of your way. I was surprised by the sudden change in attitude. Did we ever mention having bread for breakfast? Maybe we did, but I was surprised she remembered it so well. I accepted the gift gratefully and thanked her. When I opened the box, there were some beautifully packaged, seemingly expensive coffee beans inside. When I showed the coffee to Naomi after she got home, she said,
What? Why so suddenly? It's a bit creepy, though.
Looking closely at the coffee bag, Naomi said,
Ah, isn't this Kopi Luwak? I've never seen it before. It's a famous coffee, but I don't know much about it. I think it's made from cat poop or something.
No way! We both searched online to find out. The civet cats eat coffee cherries, and the beans are fermented in their digestive tract and then excreted. The beans are then cleaned, dried, and roasted. So it's a bit different than we thought. It's thoroughly cleaned, so it should be okay.
But the beans did pass through a civet cat's stomach. It's incredibly expensive coffee, though, costing over $50 for 100 grams.
Does this mean the wealthy even spend money on harassment? She probably gave it to us, thinking, drink some cat poop coffee. I usually have a good nature, but Naomi's theory seemed plausible. So, what should we do? Should we drink it? The men in our family immediately refused. Men tend to fear the unknown. Naomi and I, driven by curiosity, brewed the coffee and cautiously tasted it.
It has a unique flavor, a bit like fermented food, but it's quite delicious.
Yes, it's good. Some people might not like it, but I quite enjoy it. The caffeine seems to be a bit mild. As Naomi and I drank the Kopi Luwak, our husbands looked at us with eyes like they were watching something strange.
Did you drink the coffee? How was it?
The next morning, while Naomi and I were harvesting from our vegetable garden, the landlord came over with a smug smile.
It was delicious, as expected from the world's most expensive coffee. What a wonderful gift.
I joined in, saying yes, it was very delicious. Thank you so much.
I'm glad you liked it. I see you enjoyed civet poop coffee.
Naomi's theory that the landlord bought it without really knowing what it was turned out to be spot on.
Yes, it's amazing that something so tasty can come from civet cat droppings. Civet cats are great. I'd love to feed our vegetables to them.
It seemed the landlord didn't quite understand what Kopi Luwak was, but she understood her harassment had failed. She looked quite frustrated as we kept saying how delicious it was. That Saturday, Naomi and I made coffee jelly using the Kopi Luwak. It turned out wonderfully, and when we ate it with a little condensed milk, it was very delicious. We enjoyed it so much that even our husbands, who had been skeptical, hesitantly tried it and praised it, saying, "This is great." So shall we go, Naomi?
Yes.
We took the delicious Kopi Luwak coffee jelly we made and headed to the landlord's house.
We made coffee jelly with the coffee you gave us the other day. Please enjoy it.
Naomi handed over the cold, chilled coffee jelly to the landlord.
With that coffee? Yes, when we made coffee jelly with it, it was absolutely delicious. Even our men loved it. Here, have some.
Naomi pushed the coffee jelly toward the landlord.
Is that so? Well, I'll take some.
The landlord accepted the coffee jelly hesitantly, looking very conflicted.
Do you think she'll eat it?
I don't know. She seemed very scared, but we praised it so much, she might try it. If she does, she'll find it delicious, and she might eat it with trembling hands, like our men did.
Eating jelly with trembling hands?
Naomi burst into laughter. Our husband said they didn't understand how making something delicious and giving it to her was revenge, but Naomi and I felt quite satisfied. About a month after that incident, Naomi announced that she was pregnant. My son, my husband, and I were all delighted. The baby is due next spring. Naomi had a relatively easy pregnancy and continued to work while being mindful of her health. The landlord continued to sneak into our vegetable garden every 3 days to take vegetables, but Naomi seemed to have decided not to bother with her anymore. Once, when Naomi encountered the landlord on the spot, she said, "Again? But I won't get mad anymore. It's bad for the baby. Just take what you can eat since you live alone." She smiled as she said this. This apparently got under the landlord's skin. A while later, Mrs. Taylor next door told us that the landlord had been spreading all sorts of baseless rumors at a community gathering, saying things like, "No one knows who the father of that daughter-in-law's baby is." It was all nonsense, and no one believed her, so Mrs. Taylor assured us it was fine. Naomi and I laughed, saying, "Oh, she's come up with a new way to harass us." But my husband and son were seriously angry. "We should just move out of this place," they said. We had actually planned to move next year, but we decided to bring forward our plans to buy a house. To save money, the three of us had worked hard, with me taking care of all the housework. We had already secured the land, and the house was being custom built according to the family's wishes. At times like this, I'm glad both my son and daughter-in-law are civil servants at the city hall. They can take maternity and childcare leave properly. Naomi planned to work until 6 weeks before the due date, and then return to work without taking maternity leave.
I'd get fat if I lazed around at home. Besides, we'll need money when the baby is born, so I'll be responsible for working.
Naomi said she worked until 6 weeks before her due date and successfully gave birth to a baby boy. If a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law get along well and can help each other, raising children can be much easier. I've heard that many mothers have a hard time, so I'm grateful for our good relationship. Our first grandchild was so adorable that the whole family was crazy about him. A month after the baby was born, our family all went together to greet the landlord. Naomi was holding our grandson. I said, "Thanks to you, we've safely had a healthy baby boy."
Oh, that's great. I heard some strange rumors, so I was worried.
I thought, well, you're the one spreading those rumors, but I didn't mention it. And we said, so since our family has grown, we've decided to move. We built a house in a neighboring town. Naomi stood next to her husband, looking happy like a young, loving couple. I said, I'm truly blessed to have such a wonderful daughter-in-law. My husband nodded in agreement. Did we look like a happy middle-aged couple? The landlord's face turned red and she was silent. We said, thank you for everything. Although this is sudden, we'll move the big items tomorrow. Take care. And with that, we all headed back home. From behind us, the landlord was shouting,
Don't fool around. How dare you mock me?
Although rent wouldn't drop to zero if we announced our move just before leaving, our whole family thought that was fine. We didn't know how she would react, but we thought that if we had time before moving out, she might start a new form of harassment. We had already been gradually moving our belongings out discreetly. We were also reducing the amount of vegetables in the garden little by little. That landlord was abandoned by her son and his wife and lived alone. She was disliked by the neighbors too, which was completely self-inflicted. That's why I thought the best revenge was to show her the happy family she couldn't have.
Mom, that's scary.
Naomi laughed, but I didn't feel as exhilarated as I had thought. When we went around to greet the neighbors about our move, Mrs. Taylor next door looked genuinely sad and said, Do come by occasionally. Having lived there for 20 years, we have many memories. Still, we were also excited about starting a new life. The day after the move, we spotted the landlord watching us from the shadows but didn't say a word. The new house we built was all new, convenient, and easy to use. It was larger than the old house and had a bigger garden, so the whole family was delighted. We had done our research when looking for land, so we knew there wouldn't be any troublesome neighbors.
I'm lucky to have you around, Mom, so I'll work hard. Once this kid gets a bit older, I'd love for us to go on a family trip.
Naomi said that and returned to work. One Sunday, about half a year after moving into the new house, Naomi said,
Hey, Mom, don't you wonder about our old house? Should we go check it out?
I was a bit curious, too, about whether a new tenant had moved in and if the landlord was still the same. Naomi seemed to feel the same way. In that case, maybe we should buy a cake and visit Mrs. Taylor next door. So Naomi and I, along with our grandchild, headed to the house where we used to live, which was about a 30-minute drive. When we arrived, we exclaimed, Oh my! Both the house we lived in and the landlord's house were gone, reduced to empty lots. Even though we dropped by unexpectedly, Mrs. Taylor welcomed us warmly.
Oh, it's been so long since I've held such a little baby.
Oh, the house we used to live in is gone, isn't it?
Yes, the old lady after you moved out seemed to start picking fights with the neighbors even more because she had no one to take out her stress on. She's always had that tendency, but it got worse.
I realized that our presence had kept the landlord's stress level somewhat in check. Without us, her outlet disappeared, and she could no longer restrain herself.
Everyone got angry and contacted her son, complaining about her behavior.
I felt compelled to apologize. I'm sorry that we moved out and caused this.
Oh, Mom, come on. We were victims too, you know?
Yes, exactly. It was only because you were here that you managed to stay for 20 years. After you left, 4 months went by with no new tenants. People who came to see the house were warned by the neighbors not to move in.
I was surprised to hear that. It was a bit scary that the landlord had turned the neighbors against her, even though it was her own doing.
Her son came over and argued with her for 2 or 3 days, but in the end, she was placed in a facility. He had no intention of living with her.
The house was demolished in a flash last month, and her 2 small apartment buildings, which had also aged, would be taken down soon.
She seems to have had a good amount of money, so she's been placed in a decent facility. But from the looks of it, she probably won't get any visits from her son.
Mrs. Taylor said with a solemn expression. I realized just how crucial our family had been in maintaining a balance in the community. I exchanged glances with Naomi. Our departure disrupted the delicate balance that had been maintained. But we couldn't have stayed in that house forever. Now that the buildings were gone, the space seemed surprisingly small. Even though I only lived there for about 2 years, I still felt a bit lonely.
The landlord was also a lonely person,
Naomi said quietly. Yes, but we have a new house and a family. That's a very fortunate thing.
That's right. Let's splurge and cook something special today,
Naomi said enthusiastically, trying to cheer herself up. Let's stop by the supermarket and buy the men's favorite foods before heading home. With that, Naomi and I got into the car and left the place full of memories.